This is the Iron Sharpens Iron movement, sharing insights into the power of people-centric leading.
Hi, this is Jim, and today we welcome to our tribe a Major League Baseball mental skills coach whose coaching expertise is in the evidence-based best practices of sports and performance psychology. He utilizes behavioral science disciplines with an emphasis on mental toughness and stress inoculation. This is Andy Riise. Iron Sharpens Iron movement is brought to you by N2 Growth, a leader in executive search, leadership development, and talent management. We find and develop the world's best leaders. Learn more about our practice by visiting us at n2growth.com or click on the link in the show notes of this podcast. Andy, brother, welcome to the Iron Sharpens Iron movement. Excited to talk to you today about all things human.
Great to be with you, Jim. Thanks for having me, brother.
I tell you, this is going to be a great episode. For all of us that are in the tribe listening out there, Andy and I have a little bit of a background together. We certainly have spent quite a bit of time talking about this topic. So I'm very excited to dive in. We're just going to get right to the chase because I think everybody is after that at the end of the day when they're listening to this. So, Andy, one of the things you're a little bit famous for saying, at least in my point of view from listening and reading all your stuff, is you say a pretty simple statement. Humans are designed to perform. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's what my company is named after. And, I've been like you, Jim, I've been a geek and a student of human behavior for almost my entire life. And I think when I look at it, from an evolutionary standpoint, as human beings, as Homo sapiens, as a species, we really are designed and have evolved to really perform at a high level, meaning executing tasks at the upper range of our potential. And I think that oftentimes the reason why individuals and teams do not perform the way that we're designed is because we get in our own way. And my mission is personally to try to help people create pathways and strategies to get out of their own way and really unleash the best of who they are.
So, Andy, when you're talking about that, we're kind of underperforming as a species and all that. Are we talking about we just aren't running fast enough? We're not doing enough push-ups,
right?
Or what? When you talk about performance? Are you talking about full scope? Are you talking all the way mental performance?
Sure.
Physical, spiritual, everything. How do you define performance, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think my specific area of expertise is really the mental side. So when you think of cognitive, how we think, right? But there's an emotional piece as well too, of how we feel. That's kind of in the domain of the mind. But to back up, to the 10,000 foot level, like you said, it's really a holistic approach to fitness and performance from the mind, the body, your team, your character, and your craft. Right? There's different domains of the human dimension. When we look at look at ourselves as a species holistically, and I think performance really is about, like I said, using a specific set of skills to execute tasks consistently at the upper range of your potential, regardless of the situation or circumstances, right? And so, in other words, another way of saying that is being when you're at your best when it matters the most. And I like to actually qualify that even further by saying optimal performance, which is really about getting the most out of what you got. Because I mean, life is VUCA. I mean, like right now with the pandemic and everything going on, it's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, it's ambiguous. And, in most of what we do as far as the knowledge and skills and experiences that we have, they're not closed loop. They're not, they may be complicated where there's known variables and a specific set of outcomes, but the majority of our performances that are, both in work and in life are open loop, which means they're complex. There's a number of variables that are infinite almost. And so oftentimes your performance is defined by not peak performance. It's not always high performance. It's sometimes like, okay, I'm having a really crappy day. I got 2 hours of sleep. I got a presentation where I got to make a pitch. I really got to close a deal. I've got like 70% of my energy levels in my tank and my attention is really struggling. I'm all over the place. How do I get 60 of that? If I got 60% in the tank, how do I get the most of that 60%? So if I can get 50% of that 60%, to me, that's optimal performance. And that's really what I'm trying to help people and teams get to, from a mental and emotional standpoint, if that makes sense, Jim.
It does. And so, Andy, is this, in your experience, does it matter what age group you're in, gender, nationality? Does it matter kind of your level of experience? So, if we're talking, I'm a senior executive, I've been a CEO for 10, 15 years, I feel my brain is as sharp as it can be.
Sure.
Does any of that really matter, or is it across the board kind of how you really want to get after people?
It's really over the entire lifespan. I mean, I think I will tell you for for young people, there's a certain level of maturity that goes into, and a certain level of knowledge that is a prerequisite. I think in terms of life experience that challenges the way that I deliver and I coach young athletes versus adults. That's certainly a differentiator as well too. And so I think you meet people where they're at, but fundamentally the skills that the tools that go into the kit bag that are all the same. And that's what I love about applied behavioral science is that essentially that they're transferable to all kinds of different performance arenas. And and the arenas that I play in obviously are primarily in athletics, in business, and then obviously working with the military and law enforcement as well too, and academia. So I mean, those four performance arenas as well too. They're all the skills are essentially the same that go into them. It just the individuals do change, the performance context changes a little bit, but fundamentally they're the same. And you can get sets and reps and practice with at a high quality level, and if with good coaching, you can do a lot.
Yeah. You bring up coaching. It's a good transition point a little bit, Andy. So, do you believe that no matter where you are, so you've already baselined here in our discussion that anybody that listens to this podcast, whether they're a first line supervisor or they're a senior executive, this conversation that you're going to have with me today and with us is going to matter at all those levels. And so, if we have that, talk to me a little bit about coaching, because even though you've got a lot of athletic background, you've got a lot of military background. For me, not too many years ago, Andy, to be honest, when I thought coaching, I immediately thought about sports, and I thought about it kind of not really where I think you're indicating you could be. So,
Right.
help us narrow down how you think coaching is important and what truly is coaching from your point of view.
Yeah, that's a great question, Jim, because I think this is kind of where this is something that it's part of you and I, what our a big part of our identity and our shared purpose, and what that purpose drives our passion, not the other way around, right? And so I think that the art and science of coaching is really what I'm about, and it's really who I am and what I'm about in Life 2.0 is that I'm getting like you just crossed the bridge into retirement. I'm crossing the bridge. I'm nearly there, right? And I think a lot of times when people transition, whether it's the military, that gets a lot of attention, but I think we kind of go through this identity crisis, right? And then we focus on getting a job and where am I going to go and what am I going to do? And then we don't stop and think about philosophically, who am I and what am I about? Like, what are my values? What is my purpose? What's my philosophy? For me, I'm a coach. That's what I landed on. And I see coaching is really it's the application of leadership, but really coaching is really about training individuals and teams towards optimal performance, and that's really what it's about. And I think what that and again, notice how I'm talking about there's training, there's guiding in there as well too. Coaches are different than teachers because teachers are generally in the classroom. Teachers share information that becomes knowledge. That's super important. Mentoring is a whole bunch different thing as well too. But coaches are generally in the arena with their performers, right? They're not on the field necessarily, but they're related to that field. They can certainly relate to it, But in a lot of ways, they're a guide, right? They're not actually performing for the athlete, but they're guiding, influencing, shaping the performer to be at his or her best, or the group to be at their best, And that's ultimately about performance, right? And so that's the art and science of coaching. Really, to me, that's what it's all about: is training towards performance. And a lot of that time that focuses on craft, which is strategy, X's and O's, and that's where things that the craft or the application of knowledge and skills is really where things start to differentiate between like executive coaching and then in coaching athletics. But fundamentally, there's a lot of things that they're more the same than they are different, in my opinion.
Yeah. And do you find it also that part of coaching is really just allowing the person that you're coaching or the team to see what their potential was that's already embedded in them. They just are closed off to it themselves. They have the wrong training of thought, the wrong experiences, all those things that have potentially have misguided the, not on purpose, but they have a set of beliefs or actions that are taking them down a certain road to where a coach all of a sudden exposes another path that they could take.
Yeah, and, absolutely. I think that a core competency that all coaches have to be able to start with when they're working with an individual or a team, right, is self-awareness. And I think you have to understand, you have to help. You basically have to help hold a mirror up to that individual as far as seeing themselves as they truly are, and who they want to be, right? And then guide them along the path that's going to help uh, them meet, fill that gap, or basically make the journey between who they are right now and who they want to be, from a performance standpoint. And so, to me, that's ultimately what they do. I think they're obviously there are other related competencies that have to do with self-regulation and influence. But for to me, the fundamental core competency that all coaches have is to promote self-awareness.
So, Andy, we'll narrow this down even more. So, we'll get away from the physical side, the spiritual side for a while, all those kind of things, and some of your core competencies on the mental side of the house.
Yeah,
When when you're working on their self awareness and you're really kind of talking about this mental toughness, this mental awareness, what have you seen that's almost consistent across this human species that is the biggest block? What are some of the things that you almost consistency unlock from most of the people that you coach to get
yeah.
those aha moments?
No, for sure. Like I'd hear, so like I'm a proponent for mental toughness, and the efficacy behind that comes from Jim Lair, Peter Clow. The 4C model of mental toughness is, which we can reference to show in the show notes. It's the 4Cs are confidence, control, commitment, and challenge, right? And so I would say that the number one thing that I think people struggle with universally, is confidence, right? And that's confidence is like, a belief in your inner belief in your abilities, right? So there's different parts of that. There's self-efficacy, which has to do with how you see yourself. Then there's task specific confidence. So for example, the first time that you and I went to combat, Jim, I mean, like we had never experienced combat. So were we confident in our ability to shoot, move, and communicate, as we had trained at home station? I mean,
Right.
yeah, I suppose we were, but you don't have to be confident to perform at a high level, right? So task confidence is a variable so same thing where I work with a lot of people who are moving from, um, you know, they're a member of a team to a leadership position and management, and they've been maybe in their career field for 5 to 10 years, and this is their very first leadership experience. And you and I, Jim, I mean, we in the military we take leadership for granted, right, as a set of skills because you're either becoming a leader or you're a leader, right? And we do that really early. But that's not a shared experience that a lot of people have, especially in corporate America. And so I think having the self-efficacy, the belief in your abilities as a leader and the ability to lead others, or to be able to go, your ability to be able to go learn and then execute a task, knowing that you're going to fail and you're not going to be perfect. I think that is a universal construct I see time and again, over and over again. I mean, those 4 C's are very common, and it's why I love that model. I don't think there isn't a one size fits all model, but if I had to go to one thing that hangs people up and is a pain point that gets in the way, it's really building confidence.
So how do you get after it? How do you get after someone that has low self confidence, and they're like, Andy, I just don't see it. I don't think I can do this.
Yeah.
I've never seen what right looks like. How do you start this journey for them to gain the confidence that they need?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, to me, I start by distilling it down to the fundamentals, which to me that really gets down to your core values, right? And as human beings, there's and I had this iceberg model that I use that 10% of us are are the behaviors that other people see, and they see our performance and the end results of our behaviors. But like beneath the surface of us, we're these really complex beings, right? And I when I draw it out conceptually, the base of that iceberg of who we are as human beings is our values. That's our core beliefs, right? And like again, if confidence is really your inner belief in yourself, we have to tap into identifying and understanding where that belief system comes from, right? And so, like, there's different, tools that are out there, assessments that create awareness about what your values or your core beliefs are. And sometimes you may be aware of them, and you look at this list that, you take a survey and it spits it out, and you're like, oh, well, this makes sense. And then there's other things, values you see. So, like for me, like my three core values are love, competition, and service, right? And I just know that, right? And that's a part of my philosophy, right? So like, while a lot of people, they describe the, and you can even hear when I talk, they're like, He's a passionate dude. Like, this guy gives a shit a lot, right?" And so that's one of my strengths. But there's a shadow side of those values too, right? That can influence not only how we see ourselves, but how we see the world, right? And so that's important too. Is then there's the lens. So there's the values, the belief system, and understanding what's working for you, what's productive, and what is working against you in terms of your belief and how you see yourself and how you see others, and maybe how others see you or how you think others see you, right? And that's the lens. That's called selective perception, right? Or what I call a mental filter. And then that mental filter determines about what happens to you that's good, bad, or indifferent, right? And that interpretation of, it's kind of like a screen door, right? Or a lens, a set of glasses that we all wear. And those glasses determine how we see the world and what happens to us and how we interpret it. In positive psychology, that's called your explanatory style. And then once you understand your explanatory style, then you can start to get into the attitudes and behaviors that really help. Things like self-talk and affirmations or belief statements, things that you could do to win the argument between the ears, and how to accept things, and what you can control versus what you can't control, how you interpret things that are good, bad, and indifferent for you. And now you can start, so again, it starts with the base, the lens, and the interpretation, and then understanding what you control. I can always control the way that I think, how I believe, and what I do and don't do in response to the things that happen. And when you start to put all that equation of things together, it's not a foregone conclusion that you're going to be more confident, but it will increase the likelihood that you're going to be more confident regardless of circumstance, especially when you fail, which you're ultimately going to make mistakes and you're going to screw up. And that's how we learn, right?
Oh, I love it, Andy. It's kind of, as you were talking about the iceberg, I had a little bit of an aha moment myself, because in executive coaching, when I do assessments, personality assessments, as one of the first things in a coaching journey for executive coaching, I explain the iceberg in kind of the same type of things. Like, that tip of the iceberg, what everybody sees, is your behaviors. And what you have demonstrated is I'm actually envisioning a real iceberg in 3D. You're sitting on the other side of this iceberg, looking at the same tip, and you're explaining how these behaviors are controlled through this lens that you just described. And on my side, that I'm talking about the behavioral tip, it's driven off of your cognitive abilities, your personality traits, your motivators or your drives, and then kind of, right below that waterline is your education, your experiences, the training that you've done, all those things. And if you really look at it from, a holistic, 360-degree view of that tip of the iceberg, it's really interesting how it's all interconnected. And I think this shows how important it is to not only have, great cognitive ability. You went to a great B school, your personality, you're very self-aware, all that stuff. You're very in tune to your motives. But the realities are, you probably do need that coaching from the Andy point of view too, to really work on those things, those behavioral traits that are actually inherent to the mirror that you're looking at.
Yep, absolutely. And I will tell you that, it's always about action, right? And that's been my big thing recently that I posted about and been thinking a lot about, is that this idea, is that there's a lot of thought leaders out there, which is great. We having, about who are, have big ideas and are promoting innovation. And there's also conversations that are super importantly we're having now, but none of that matters unless you go action it, right? You go apply it. So to me, I'm all about the applied practice of psychology, right? Because
Love it.
no growth or behavioral change happens when we're having this conversation right now, or when we're having a coaching session. It's just like going to the gym and working with a personal trainer, right? I mean, you're going in, you're maybe reluctantly or excitedly working with a personal trainer. You get a, you go to Orange Theory, you go sweat you sweat your ass off, and you have a great workout, but that's not where you've grown. That's where you've broken yourself down. And so, and then, but the growth happens in between that session, right? What do you do to feel your body to recover in between those gym sessions? Well, the same thing happens in coaching when we're talking about mental and emotional skills, like right now, too, right? Nothing matters what we're talking about unless it's applied with quality sets and reps. And to me, that's where I'm really focusing on with my clients more than anything is ensuring that they're going and taking what we're talking about and putting it into action, because otherwise it doesn't matter and it won't move the needle for them or for me.
It's someone that's been in the Army for a while, Andy. I know you'll appreciate this, but I love the three phrase of be, know, and do.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
it's
Right. Yep.
about the action. It is, leadership's a verb, actionable, things is all a verb. It is all about that movement, the act of actually doing it. And I think that's the biggest foot stop. There's a lot of people out there that just talk a lot of junk, or be a good thinker and they'll sit on their couch. And I'll be honest with you, Andy, I'm a little guilty of that too. Like I'm a huge believer in high resilience. I'm a huge believer in the corporate athlete. I think it is a real thing. And when we define corporate athlete, we just kind of mean the entire thing, body, mind, soul, all of that. That's a very real thing to really get to the tip of the spear. And I find myself a lot of times failing to take that action. And when you do that, it's a significant difference because all you are at that point is a poser,
No,
and
you're
you're
right.
not an actual person.
No, you're right. We all. I think that when we have that imposter syndrome as practitioners, that's a good thing because it's keeping us humble, right? We want to be guys who walk the talk. I mean, it's just who we are. I mean, not everybody cares about that, I think, but that's where the wheat gets separated from the chaff, right? And like coaches who just want to charge you, $350 an hour as an executive to go listen to you for an hour. I mean, hey, you could go, anybody could do that. Any chump can go do that. But when you have someone who cares about you, who's invested in you, who walks the talk and everything they're talking about, they've tried on themselves and they're caveating everything saying like, hey, I struggle with this too. Like, I'm the same way. I mean, there's a lot of things that I struggle with. And as a matter of fact, there's a joke that, people who in psychology, get in that field because they were screwed up themselves at some point in time. And guilty as charged, man. And so yeah. Anyways, yeah,
I think one of the things about coaching and being a good coach is that you hold people accountable.
sure.
It's one thing to encourage people to go and do and be an actionable type person, but a coach should hold those people accountable, and a good coach will. If a coach is just like, oh well, lets you off the hook, they're not really coaching you.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think it's interesting. I think that how do you do that? There's definitely an art and science of how do you do that the right way, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I know that there's all kinds of different ways to do that. I think, but meeting people where they're at and with understanding what they're willing to do, and then understanding how. I think that big thing is kind of understanding how they're motivated. We're all motivated both extrinsically and intrinsically. We're not just, it's not binary, right? And I think when you start to kind of figure out what those levers are and what their tolerance is, it's almost kind of like you're holding the mirror up to them. You're having them hold themselves accountable versus you holding them accountable, and vice versa. You're encouraging them and guiding them to really to hold themselves accountable because it's really ultimately about the client. It's not about you, right? So it's like, don't do me any favors by, reminding me. I mean, this is for you, right?
Exactly right. So you've identified some of these things, and starting with confidence and all of those kind of things. We've talked about that tip of the iceberg, and now the coach is holding accountability for the action to get these things done. You have another great saying that I love too, because it's probably at this point, if somebody's listening to it, they're like, okay, well, all they've talked about really is, all right, look myself in the mirror. All right, I'm confident now. I'll hold myself accountable. I'll find a teammate to hold me accountable for what I decide to do. You like to say, get uncomfortable being uncomfortable.
100%.
So talk to us about that. So, because I think a lot of people, again, is kind of still in that, okay, yeah, I've identified myself. Yeah, it's great. But how do you know when you're really pushing yourself?
Yeah, for sure. I think again, and I think the indicator when you seek deliberate discomfort, which is the title of a book that my colleagues and I wrote in a company called Mission 60. If your listeners want to check that out, maybe we can throw it in the show notes. But
You will.
it was really all about it's all about the struggle, and not necessarily that not only just your triumphs, but or when you've fallen flat on your face, when you've been mediocre, and the times that you are most proud of, and when you've learned and grown the most, across the human dimension, are the times when you've been either forced to or sought to get out of your comfort zone, right? And so when things are easy, you're not as satisfied, right? When things are given to you, and so like, hey, when you're given the raise that maybe you didn't deserve, or you're getting paid a good salary for, you're not working very hard, or maybe your team won a championship, and the competition really wasn't that good, and it was like there's that victory that you can savor is not as it's not as sweet. But I think, even from a memory standpoint, I mean, the way that our brains are hardwired, the things that stand out are the things that we had to like actually have, where our brain has changed because of like almost scarring that happens, right? Those are the memories that just jump out to us in our long term memory, and that's when we've had to get uncomfortable. We had to stretch and get out of our comfort. Like, we've had to do something that was hard, that was beyond our capability or our capacity at the time, and that, we didn't really want to do, but we did it anyways, by my need or want. And that's when we've gotten better as individuals, but also as teams. For me, my whole life has been, and I wasn't wanting growing up, but I mean, my entire adult life, it has all been about the struggle, and about failing and getting back up again. And I, especially working with the special operations community, that culture is really built around that idea of collective struggle, and how that helps you develop into really high performing cultures and teams. And I think that it's a recipe, an art and science I don't think isn't talked about enough. And I think that we really try to bring that to life, because it's relevant if you're in the battlefield, or the boardroom, or in the ball field. So that idea, that philosophy is important, but it's more than that. It's really a how to.
So let's dive a little more into that, Andy. So I'm in the boardroom. You mentioned the boardroom. So I'm a senior executive. I'm in the C-suite, and it's fine for you to say, the special operations. I come from special ops, and I envision jumping out of airplanes and swimming high seas and all that kind of stuff. I'm in the boardroom, man. So how do I have these big defining moments that are embracing the suck with my fellow board members, that I can really actually change, the scarring in my mind to make me grow? I don't think that's out there. Or is there?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I
And I
reframe.
said that cynically.
Yeah, I think I reframe. Yeah, exactly. I think that the first thing you do is you kind of reframe. You reframe what performance means, right? And then you talk about like what are the tasks that matter to them, like, and then what are the big things, and then what are the little things, and you really break it down to understand that performance is really about the mundanity of excellence. Everybody talks about excellence, but really, it's really the little micro tasks that you do day in, day out, that really add up to, when we know they add up to the big things, right? And so, it's are you, if you're preparing for that pitch, right? And it's like, hey, and it's 5 o'clock, and we've only had one rep, in terms of rehearsing this too. Are we going to call it good, and let's go hit happy hour, and then screw it, and let caution go to the wind, which may make the difference between whether or not we, land this sale or not, and we make our quota for the quarter? Or are we gonna collectively decide to that it's uncomfortable to stay late, but maybe I'm gonna call home. Let's all commit right now to getting two more good quality reps in, to ensure that we've got this locked in tight, because we're gonna practice until we can't get this wrong. Because that's something that obviously special operations guys are known for. We don't always do that, okay, right? But when if we're practicing something to the level, that we can't get it wrong, we're not practicing the level just to get it right and then leave caution to the wind. but we're going to keep practicing and rehearsing this until we cannot fail, right? That's uncomfortable to do that, right? Because nobody wants to stay late. We'd much rather just call it good and say screw it and let's make it happen. But it's a conscious decision to get out of your comfort zone and for you to individually and collectively decide that you're going to do something more than what you normally would, right? And to me, that's when growth happens, right? And when you start stringing those little micro performances together, that's when habits start to form, right? That lead to big things, I think.
Andy, that's such a huge aha moment, right? It's the string of micro performances. It's the little things. It's the little things that add up to the big things. And that is where high performing organizations excel at, and those that run on the wayside. It's really interesting too, is when we're talking about performance, not only from the human species as we started to, but just kind of the discipline of doing it and doing this with your teams. It's so amazing to me that time and time again, when I have conversations with senior executives, that they're always chasing one, everybody, it's insatiable, right? Business is insatiable. You can never be good enough. You're always after the next big deal, all of those things. But they seem to chase for a lot of people on their team to just try to send them to the latest and greatest fancy new school or new course, and all of those kind of things. And they're trying to have other people solve this mystery problem of how I can become high performing. But the realities are almost everything that you've talked about today is, again, looking in the mirror, but also just holding accountable the things that you have in control yourself. These are all things that aren't going to cost you thousands of dollars, are they?
No, absolutely not. I mean, and I think that's where, I would like to see companies that, from my consulting perspective, I would almost like them to seek solutions internally and exhaust all those internally source solutions first before they start seeking the external solutions. And, I mean, same thing. And I benefited from this as from like even when working with NFL teams, they want to have this amazing tactical flavored training experience, right? To where then the players and the coaches are all, it's a day long event. They're dressed like soldiers. They break up the teams. They have tactical missions. They're doing airsoft. They're shooting, moving, communicating. They're working with wounded warriors and all this stuff. And then, and at the end of the day, you're kind of like, all right, well, you know, what did this accomplish, right? And so from the consulting perspective is like, hey, I want to establish a relationship because I know behavioral change that can actually be, quantifiable and qualifiable. That takes more than this, right? But the NFL team is kind of like, well, I only got a certain amount of budget. And I just wanted to have one big team building event, and but that didn't really accomplish anything anyway. So it almost is yeah, it's a fun thing that we can talk about when we're having beers with our buddies about, that I hung out, former Green Berets can hang on NFL players. NFL players say they hang out with Green Berets, but at the end of the day, did we move the needle, right? And so, my buddy Eric Korm and I were recently talking about that, who worked with NFL franchise, and we both agree, like, hey, our organization's better off served by, instead of investing that money that they would have had for the one-off event, into something that is going to allow the team to be able to receive training, that towards whatever their goal is for that season, right? And pick a topic, right? So you not only save money, but you're maximizing the time available to you. And I think if people look more internally versus externally from an organizational perspective, we may be better off.
And it still takes a good, high quality coach like yourself. There's no doubt you've got to have the guide, you've got to have the Sherpa that leads the way, points to the North Star, all of those things. You still need them. But I think so many people just are chasing after the easy button that doesn't exist. It doesn't exist out there. There's no such thing as the easy button.
No, you're right. It takes work. It takes work, man. It takes work, and it drives me nuts. Like everything's talking about mind hacks and quick fixes and apps, and so hey, it's almost like the 8-minute abs for the mind, and and it's great. The science is really catching up to things. Like if you remember the brain games and things like that were completely debunked. That were like, and you can take nootropics and you're going to be levitating and have this nirvana state. It just it just buyer beware. I just tell all the audience out there too. If it seems too good to be true, in terms of, anything, let alone the mental and emotional and social components that are intangible and difficult to measure. If it seems too good to be true, it is, and more likely than not.
Now that you've really started to hyper focus kind of in this area of expertise, what has been some of the things that have surprised you that are truly valid? So, you talk about these quick fix hacks, okay? But like, through the use of functional MRI now in the last few years about how we now are validating, in the psychology and, it was kind of theory for so many years, and now some things are valid.
Yeah.
What are some of the ones that you're just like, holy cow, I can't, this is like real. This really happens. And it's simple things to where, what is your favorite hack that really does work?
No, I think that the really cool thing that I'm seeing right now is in that we've known has existed for thousands of years. It has to do with like deliberate recovery strategies, specifically things that kind of help combat stress and manage your energy levels, right? And so I think that when I say deliberate recovery strategies, I'm talking everything from like sleep, and the sleep science is absolutely amazing. And and there's so many cool and I'm all about solutions that help, that are no tech, that are low tech and high tech, that can help the end user take things that are, because I deal with the intangibles, Jim. I mean, as you know, whenever things you can't see them, it's really hard to make them real. And I think when I see the science of sleep, which is like, okay, well, most of when we're asleep, we're unconscious. So how do I value sleep? It's like sleep when I die, like the military type of thing, and it's suck it up and drive on. And when we in the military, there's been such a de-emphasis, and undervaluing the idea about recovery. And then we wonder why our bodies and minds are broken after 20 to 25 years. It's like we're like, it's the Apache warhorse mentality. Hey, I'm gonna ride him until they die and then eat him, right? And so I think that we understand, especially with in the Army, I've seen such a huge, when there's a manual that's talking about strategic napping, that is an indicator that we have really started to turn the corner, which was a long, long arc. I mean, believe me, to turn that corner, right? That we're seeing, again, like power naps. When I'm using mindfulness and meditation strategies, when hey, maybe I didn't get a full night's sleep, but it's kind of like eating a hoagie. If I can't eat the whole hoagie, how do I get a bite of the sandwich, right? And so, but then on top of that, to then things like I'm wearing an Aura ring right now. It's a ring that has some of the highest rated sensors on the market to measure your heart rate variability. And it's like EKG level tech. I mean, it just blows my mind, right? And so I think the convergence of these practical strategies that like meditation that have been around for thousands of years, now meet the modern science of that technology is able to show us in real time as the end user, is just really, really exciting. And I think we're just really scratching the surface in the frontier of the mind and in terms of what's possible. And I'm excited to hopefully be on the forefront of that in some ways.
And so, Andy, yeah, I had mentioned this term prior, but I want to kind of get your feeling on it, your reaction on it when I threw out the word corporate athlete. What is your reaction to that phrase? I'm sure you've heard it before because we've talked about tactical athletes in the world that we come from. But the corporate athlete, do you believe it's a real thing?
100%.
And where do you believe, if I'm out there and let's say I'm in a mid market company and I'm trying to really make the difference, is a conversation like what you're listening to today between you and I really going to matter?
Yeah, no, I think the idea of the corporate athlete maybe gets some chuckles in some circles, but it's a very real thing. I first heard it from Dr. Jim Laird, who's like one of my sports psychology heroes. I mean, he's one of the best known kind of really mainstream guys in his field. And he started the Human Performance Institute in Orlando that was bought by Johnson and Johnson, which has as many people as the Army, by the way, 1.1 million people. They bought that from him, and when that happened, and they started using this term corporate athlete, and they were really focused in on stress and recovery. not only from a mental and emotional and leadership standpoint, but really deep diving on the physiology piece, especially the nutrition, and digging into a lot of the science, the physiology, and the psychology of that. That's when I really started to keep my mind. He came and visited us when I was teaching at West Point, and he was telling us about it, and it really just opened my mind up. Because at the time, as a young officer, my optic beyond the military was really restricted, right? So the idea about some of the skills that and some of the science was being used for people in the business world was really interesting to me too, because I didn't think there was a big physical. My my assumption was there wasn't a big physical component of what goes into working in a white collar job, for example, and so. But little did I know that I was entering the white collar part of my career, But, so staff happens, right? Um, but I think what really blew my mind is when I started reading some of Jim Lehre's books. Although there's like you take the idea of energy, that's your capacity to do work. Fundamentally, though we talk about there's mental and emotional and physical and you can even say spiritual components of energy, right? Which kind of gets into the ethereal woo-woo California hot tub stuff. What Jim Laird talked about is that it's all fundamentally physiological, right? So like glucose and oxygen is just one of the other fundamental things that we all have to have. So if let's think of that as physical. So if anybody who's in a corporate setting who's white collar and doesn't think that there's a physical capacity, there is a physical component to what they do. I mean, it's laughable now because the science is so squarely in the face of that, and how you feel yourself, and moving. The more that you move throughout the day, even if you work behind a desk, that's going to affect your cognitive abilities and your social interactions, right? So I think this holistic idea of fitness is very real now, and I think there's a premium on it. I think, and we've seen it over the last 10 years. Look how many corporate wellness programs that are out there, and you also look at how much it's $1 billion industry. Insurance companies are paying a lot of money for corporations, but the epidemic of stress has not decreased, right? And so the fact that we're really at this I think we're really at this point to where how do you develop the corporate athlete using some of the same techniques that we use to develop tactical athletes and athletes in sport are really going to start to converge, because we're going to start seeing the sharing of information and best practices, and that's going to become more of the coin of the realm, I think. And I think if we do it right, we're going to change the face of what corporate wellness looks like. We're not there yet, but I think that the potential is very real, and we're on the edge of that.
Without a doubt. And it's guys like you, people like you, that now are tying in that, wellness is directly related to performance. And then the type of performance can be gauged at different levels, all through this holistic approach. And it's all continuously, centered on that humans are designed to perform.
That's right.
Yeah, that's this is interesting stuff, Andy. I can imagine that I wouldn't mind doing another podcast with you, but do it live post COVID, sitting around a fire and just turning a recorder on and talking for hours on this, because I think this is a topic that obviously you're very passionate about. You know so much about. We haven't even scratched the surface really about where we could talk about taking people to the next level. But I think it's a good enough teaser for sure to get the tribe that listens to us on these type of podcasts excited to dive down a little bit deeper. Do you have a few references that you think is important that we'll throw in the show notes, but that you want to kind of emphasize here about, you want to give any shout outs to certain organizations that somebody could do some research on and say, where do I go to learn more? What do I do to kind of start to get my focus on a little bit more into this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for anybody who's interested in the book project I was part of is called Deliberate Discomfort. They can find that at www.mission60 or at Amazon or wherever your preferred bookseller is. That's that. In terms of the art and science of coaching, although it's primarily focused in on athletic coaches from at Texas A&M University, is where the coaching academy is that I'm teaching and working at now. You can go check us out at just Google search simple Texas A&M Coaching Academy. Find us out there too. There's some resources and a new website we're promoting there. If you want to follow me, definitely I'm probably most active on LinkedIn. And so, check me out there. I'm pretty active there. I'm also on Twitter and on Instagram. You either follow my, Andy _Riise. My last name's Riise. Or you can follow my company website, which is Designed to Perform. Don't have a website yet; it's in development, but that's gonna be on the lookout for that soon. And just reach out to me. And then I love to hear from members of the audience to see what your pain points are, what are your successes, what questions you have, and find out what's on your mind, because that's staying relevant and responsive as a coach is something that I'm really interested in doing.
Well, Andy, you certainly have showed us today that, like the high human skill is directly related to those intangible attributes of leadership. No doubt about that. And I'd love for you to take us out on the podcast with one last thought or idea of inspiration or anything like that you'd like to leave the tribe today.
Yeah, just find a way to get 1% better every single day at what you do, and if you can do that, and you're choosing to get out of your comfort zone and get in the arena and act, you're going to make yourself and other people better. So just focus on getting 1% better every day and beat yesterday, and I'll see you in the arena.
Andy, we'll see you in the arena. Thanks again.
See you, brother.
Take care. Thanks for joining our leadership movement this week. Talking to Andy about why high human skills relate to the intangible attributes of leadership are so important in the cognitive revolution that's required for today's modern leader. Don't forget our show notes are posted on the website with key leader takeaways, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast and tell a friend so that we can continue to build the tribe. Until next time, remember that iron sharpens iron. Make yourself and others around you better every single day.